Well, good morning, everyone. I happen to be, looking for something, and this book on a bookshelf at home caught my eye. Didn't recognize it, so I grabbed it, and it's discarded from Columbia University East Asian Library. Somehow I got it. Withdrawn, it says. So, occasionally libraries go through their collections, and if they have duplicates and things like this. And lo and behold, it's from 1958. And it's good old Professor Kanze's translation from Sanskrit of the Diamond Sutra and the Heart Sutra. Of course, the Heart Sutra is probably the most famous Buddhist sutra. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. The Diamond Sutra, though, was the first book printed in the world. And it has this famous verse. See if I can find it to get it correct. It's very short, sutra itself. Not as short as the Heart Sutra, but nonetheless, it's one that often gets read because it's short. Let's see if I can find it. Excuse me. As stars, a fault of vision, as a lamp, a mock show, dewdrops or a bubble, a dream, a lightning flash or a cloud, so should one view what is conditioned. This famous verse from the Diamond Sutra. In the history of the Diamond Sutra, so this is, first book ever printed in the world. And it was printed with wood blocks, where the Tibetans, still maintain this art of carving, a block of wood in reverse, if you can imagine, and then using that to print. There was a huge Tibetan publishing house in Derge in eastern Tibet, in Kham, that put out all sorts of texts, for centuries. But the Diamond Sutra has a preface, and the preface has, of course you can't see it, but this beautiful woodblock print of the Buddha giving teachings. Again, oldest book, printed book in the world. It only this particular woodblock print, that the visual part of the frontispiece, only survived because this text was hidden in what's called the Cave of the Thousand Buddhas on the old ancient Silk Route, that Marco Polo traveled. So it's in far western China and even beyond China, going farther west, and Dunhuang. This is exactly what Megan has been studying for these years. She's just defending her dissertation this week or next week? This Tuesday, yeah. So we've been very fortunate because the British and French explorers discovered these sealed caves, been sealed for almost 1,000 years, or at least 700, protecting it from all the impermanence of the wars of Central Asia. So interestingly, the Diamond Sutra, right? All right, so the first book printed in the world, printed on woodblock prints, translated from Sanskrit to Chinese by a Buddhist monk, Kumarajiva. Very nice sounding, good Sanskrit name. Must have been a good Indian boy, right? But he wasn't. He was Khotanese, one of these Central Asian cultures that doesn't exist anymore, but were intimately involved in the transmission of Buddhism from India to China. The Diamond Sutra, very popular in China. It's hard to know these things, but in Chinese Buddhism, at least in Zen Buddhism, the greatest practitioner is held to be this, in China, Wei Ning, this boy who came to full enlightenment at the age of 13. His story was he was illiterate, and his father had passed away. His mother was a widow. He lived with his mother. They were very poor. he would go out during the day and collect firewood, kindling, things like that, and then bring bundles of kindling to the marketplace and sell them. And one day there was a Buddhist monk walking through the marketplace, and he was chanting the Diamond Sutra. And when Hui Neng heard the Diamond Sutra, he came to full awakening. Had never gone to school, was illiterate, and yet obviously knew the words. But whether he knew the academic meaning of words, the proper meaning of the words, who knows? But nonetheless, came to full awakening, and eventually made his way to a temple and was a servant in a temple. And it happened that the master of the temple intuited the boy's realization. Then the master passed away, and there was going to be the monks organized like a contest who should be the new master of the temple. And they had people write out verses, and you could post your verse on a wall, and whoever had the most profound statement would be named the head of the temple. And so there were verses, posted up on this wall, and Hui Neng saw one of these verses and wasn't quite as far along in realization. I can't remember the verse itself, but the verse that he read that someone else had posted, the head monk had posted, was something like, "Our mind is like a mirror bright. Scrub the dust off of it continuously," something like that. And Hui Neng wrote a verse, had someone else write it out for him because he was illiterate, but wrote out something like, "The mind is not a mirror bright, no dust can alight." So it's like a step further, so to be, as far as the inexpressibility of the nature of our mind. Although there was nothing wrong that the head monk had written, Hui Neng had a deeper understanding. So he put that up. And based on that, he became, when they discovered who had written it, he became head of the temple, which of course started a minor civil war in the monastery. So they drove him out of town. Our history is so important to us because the Tibetans have, many people that they consider having the level of full realization like Hui Neng. Chinese, I think not as many, although I don't know Chinese Buddhism really. Not that I know Tibetan Buddhism. But nonetheless, these histories are so helpful because you see what human beings do and what human beings are. And of course, in our own meditation, we see all those forces in our own mind. Maybe not fully manifested out. I'm not going out and, shooting people, but the hatred's there. And so we're going to the cause and we see it. And of course, we can cut it off at the root. This is so helpful in an outer way and an inner way, and then ultimately in a secret way. It's so helpful to have this bigger view. I think of it often like either being like a teacher or a parent. You have a fuller range of experience of other people, so you immediately have more patience and actually more compassion automatically. It isn't anything that's manufactured. It's just a natural expression of your mind. And so this is very helpful. When you see the little kid doing something stupid, you don't have to hate him in order to stop him from doing that. But you understand, and you stop him from doing that with actual concern, with love. So I once saw a game, I think it was some football game. It was on TV, but I think it was at Pennsylvania State University. They have this stadium, it's like 100,000 people. And of course, it's just a wildly partisan environment. So they have some big game, I don't know what it was. But they had 100,000 people, and they had handed out like white towels to everybody going into the stadium. And so when they were mad at the other team, they would wave this towel, or when they're really excited about their team doing something, a particular play, they would wave their towel. 100,000 people waving this towel. It was a very impressive visual display. But it struck me, it's like, you're your partisanship, your love, you might say, even if it's a twisted kind of love for your home team, is so great that you just have to express it. And of course, that's what the Mahayana is. The full realization has to be expressed. It's like you can't hold it in anymore. But it also works the other way. If you want to become a Penn State fan, start waving that white towel. And you might be 3 years old. You don't really know what you're doing. But it's like your initiation into this bigger family of Penn State fanatics, which of course is the source of the word fan, fanatic. But nonetheless, it starts drawing you in. You're doing the things of a Penn State fan. Eventually you come to the understanding of, our team is great. And its history and everything is powerful. So all that's helpful to be a Penn State fan. But in a way, it's no different from the Dharma. The Dharma with its extreme profundity, of course, but it's manifested here right now. And so we do these things, all these symbols, all these teachings, everything. They're just aids. You can't put your finger on that ultimate understanding. But of course, that's its greatness. If you can put your finger on it, it's conditioned. If you can put your finger on it, it's subject to impermanent. So it does maybe a little bit of benefit, but in the end is just sort of a little twister of dust. So I found this book by good old Professor Kanze, and he has a short introduction to it, preface, which I thought was rather helpful. So again, he's writing in 1958. There was a time when wisdom was prized more highly than almost anything else, and it was no mean compliment that the Delphic oracle named Socrates as the wisest of all the Greeks. Nowadays, most people will agree with Bertrand Russell, quote, that although our age far surpasses all previous ages in knowledge, there has been no correlative increase in wisdom, unquote. At times, it may even appear as though the rapid growth of scientific knowledge has been bought at the expense of much of the wisdom which our less well-instructed forefathers could draw upon. If literary documents are anything to go by, past ages had a better record than our own, and we have nothing to show that could rival the ancient wisdom literature of Greece and India. In fact, those who want to learn about wisdom must of necessity draw on the tradition of the fairly remote past. For centuries, almost everyone has been silent on the subject. Philosophers, of whom some love of wisdom, which is what philosophy means, philosophers of whom some love of wisdom might be expected, have increasingly turned to the critical examination of knowledge and are largely engaged in active disparagement of all that once passed for wisdom. Nor has the effect of scientific and technical progress been any more propitious. What indeed could be more unscientific than the pursuit of wisdom, with its concern for the meaning of life, with its search for ends, purposes, and values worthy of being pursued, with its desire to penetrate beyond the appearance of things to their true reality? Really, what could be more unscientific? In a world occupied with the manipulation of sense data, the contemplation of suprasensory essences seems an almost grotesque undertaking. Contemporary religious movements are equally unhelpful. Intent on extreme simplification, they take pride in discarding the intellectual content of religion. Whether we look to Billy Graham and moral rearmament was like an evangelical movement that took place in England. Kanze was English. Whether we look to Billy Graham and moral rearmament, or farther east to Krishnamurti and the Shinshu of Japan, the demands made on our intellect and comprehension are reduced to a minimum. By contrast, 2,000 years ago, both the Mediterranean and India went through a particularly creative period, which saw the Hebrews writing about Chokmah, the Gnostics about Sophia, and the Buddhists about Prajnaparamita, or the perfection of wisdom. In spite of many differences caused by the social and cultural background, The wisdom tradition at that time achieved a fair degree of universality, and its Indian form was distinguished more by its uncompromising sublimity and otherworldliness than by the peculiarity of its tenets. The work of Proclus and Dionysius Areopagita, and even the Academica of Cicero, show that some of the specific teachings of the Prajnaparamita were once quite familiar to the West. And then he gets into the teachings on the perfection of wisdom. And I'll read that next paragraph too. The Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom literature, consists of 38 different books composed in India between 100 BC and 600 AD. The judgment of 30 generations of Buddhists in China, Japan, Tibet, and Mongolia have singled out two of these as the holiest of the holy, the Diamond Sutra and the Heart Sutra, both perhaps of about the 4th century of our era. The first is known in Sanskrit as the Vajracharika Prajnaparamita, the perfection of wisdom which cuts like a thunderbolt. The second sets out to formulate the very heart, core, or essence of perfect wisdom, and is as diligently studied in the Zen monasteries of Japan as in the lamaseries of Tibet. The authors of these works were well aware that the language is ill-suited to expressing the insights of a wisdom which aims at no less than the total extinction of self-grasping. For, to quote Plotinus, now Plotinus was a Greek who was lived in Roman Egypt, but he was a Greek. He lived like in the 200s, the 100s and 200s, I believe. And he was a philosopher. He was a follower of Plato's teachings. And Plato is like, 500 years, I think, 400 years before Christ. So Plotinus, and his teachings were mystical teachings which kind of extended. He was very influenced all through the Middle Ages, so influenced Christianity greatly through his school, which came to be called as Neo-Platonism, the new teachings of Plato, so to speak. But at any rate, the authors of these works were well aware that language is ill-suited to express the insights of a wisdom which aims at no less than the total extinction of self-grasping. For, to quote Plotinus, quote, "How shall a man behold this ineffable beauty which remains within and proceeds not without where the profane may view it," unquote. Nevertheless, the sages of old have thought it worthwhile to attempt the impossible, and some goodwill perhaps comes from making their work available to the distracted world of today. This, makes me sad, because when Kanzi talks about the distracted world of today, 1958, I remember 1958. As far as 2023 is, hold my beer. Commentaries are not a particularly rewarding form of literature, being neither easy to write nor pleasant to read. But ready intelligibility does not go well with the depth of thought, and these texts require a great deal of explanation, which I have supplied from the traditional Indian commentaries. So he gets into, again, this is the preface of his book. But to make the point a little further with him, he says it cannot be the purpose of a commentary to convey directly to the reader the spiritual experiences which a sutra describes. These only reveal themselves to persistent meditation. So the great aid that we have here is in a lot of Western Buddhism, people just, commentaries, we don't need a commentary, I can just meditate. It's this kind of really sort of narcissistic American kind of individualism gone wild. I don't need anything that's come from before. I can just do it on my own. It's kind of an extreme kind of Protestant attitude. So there's that. And on top of it, it seems kind of intellectual or academic or something, go over these things. And of course, Americans, we're a very kind of anti-intellectual culture. Not that there isn't all sorts of intellectualism going on here, but basically someone expressed American spirit as, well, root hog or die. I mean, it was like, get some corn grown out of your land or you're not going to survive. So it's very much self-reliant. All that's good qualities. But like anything else, when we attach even to the good qualities, they become bad qualities. We live in this funny kind of situation. So all these teachings are pointing at the mind. And of course, like waving the white towel at a football game, we need these things. Why? Because they've laid out. I mean, I think we're so indebted to the Tibetans because of the way that the Dharma came to them. I mean, again, they were totally warlike, illiterate people. I mean, they had a language, but they didn't have a writing system. And they decided from the top down, okay, let's be Buddhists now. In a period of 300, 400, 5 centuries, bringing their best and brightest over the Himalayas, bringing the teachings back, the full range of Buddhist teachings as they existed in India at the peak of their development in India. So this is a great, great resource. And they brought all this back. And of course, that's very helpful. Very helpful. Because they had this sustained kind of societal investigation of all of this. And so the framework that they give for approaching the Dharma, for learning the Dharma, to realizing the Dharma is extremely helpful because, I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have to walk the path ourselves, each one of us. We have to do it ourselves. And yet there are guides out there. But like the Dalai Lama said, well, they taught us that there are 5 primary afflictive emotions. And he said, if science discovers there's a 6th, that's fine. We'll adopt that too. So it's about reality. It's not about trying to fit yourself into somebody else's concept of reality. And yet at the same time, the genius of this is that we use concepts to get beyond concepts. Like they said in ancient India, if you have water in the ear, how do you get it out? Well, by putting some water in your ear and washing the whole thing out together. And it's very much like that. These examples are so helpful because right now we're full of all sorts of concepts, right? And so what we're doing is we're injecting great concepts into our mind. Concepts that include those little concepts that we got floating around. But it's like a tsunami of goodness. It just overpowers and flushes it all out. And so you can have someone who is beyond concepts and yet paradoxically using concepts more skillfully than anyone else. The concept afflicted to help other people to get beyond concepts. So, it's subtle. It's not the kind of thing that works for a TV ad or a political statement or any of these lesser kinds of efforts. But it's extremely, extremely reliable. And of course, this is the whole thing. So we have this scale. And what does it say? Well, first you learn the teachings, then you contemplate the teachings, then you meditate on the teachings. And what does that mean? Well, hear the teachings. The Shravakas, the hearers. It's not just hearing. Traditionally, it was someone teaching, like we have going here with Kempo. But it also means reading a book. It means looking at a video. Whatever you have to do to sort of get yourself learning these concepts and principles. But then and there's a great relief in just that much of even hearing that, there's something like the Dharma. And they say this is, sort of beyond suffering. I mean, already the fact that there's a possibility out there lessens the pure 100% anxiety of when you see, this is the first noble truth, seeing the actual situation that we are in as a self-grasping human, feeling ourselves to be totally alienated from the rest of the world. The world's out there, I'm here, instantly, 100% suffering. But even the thought, well, maybe there's an answer to this. And it's not just some guy spouting off, but instead, 2,500 years? maybe there's something to it. So that releases, that calms the mind to some degree. But then the next stage, contemplating, analyzing, pounding it with your mind. Like the Buddha said, you have to pound it, like apparently in ancient India, if you wanted to test the purity of gold in the market, you would pound it because the impurities, the lead and everything would come out if you were pounding the gold. So we have to do that. But this is also more, our mind now is more engaged with what? Well, this concept, these concepts of patience or whatever. But at the same time, that patience in our lives, the blissful things in our lives, the virtuous things in our lives, all those things are actually our true nature coming through, shining in this world of dualism. So they are greater than the non-virtues. It's not just some sort of everything's the same and we're just choosing to do one as opposed to the other. I mean, that might be going on and we might have that kind of attitude. But in truth, the virtue is better. So although our mind in its essence is empty, it's vast like space, that space still has this beautiful blue color. It has quality. It's not just an emptiness. It's not just a space. It's not just a vacuity, but rather it has quality. This is the essence of the Mahayana. It's not just a negativity that I'm away from suffering, but I'm totally involved in this world of appearances, but not stained by it. Like the lotus growing up out of the muck, it's above it in a sense, but it's totally rooted in it. Paradox of paradoxes. But the peace that comes from this analysis and from this study, which is, goes on and on, of course, it never ends. The deeper you go, you're doing the same process until a very high state with whatever you're trying to learn. A greater confidence has. Why? Because you've studied it. So you first heard the teaching, well, sun comes up in the east. Oh, that's good. I've been living in a state of total darkness. And now there's this teaching that the sun comes up in the east. Well, I feel a little bit better. I heard the truth. But now to study that, every morning I'm looking up, where's the sun coming up? And still you're convinced yourself, but through your own efforts, through your own pounding. And so then when some crazy person says on TV, the sun's coming up in the south now, you don't get angry at him because you know, and you know that you know. So then the final step is meditation. And meditation, the Tibetan word gom, means to grow accustomed to. And that's very helpful because, again, the meaning of all these words, in Megan's dissertation, Gretchen's reading, she gave us one chapter to read. It was very technical, analyzing these texts that were translated from Chinese to Tibetan and then Tibetan back to Chinese. She's identified this Chinese translator as actually being a Tibetan, I think, through amazing kind of detective work through these texts and words and scripts. It's really kind of amazing. But, 15 pages she spends on the meaning of the word Lotsawa, translator. So this is, there are profound meanings in these terms. We throw them around because words are cheap. It used to be the Tibetans, for instance, when newspapers, Tibetans, they would never throw away a printed text because it was the words of the Buddha. It held the means it pointed out the means to liberation for people. It'd be like us, I don't know, disrespecting a hospital or something. I mean, it's like you just don't do that. And then when the printed word came, the printing press, in modern Tibet, they wouldn't throw out like the New York Times. But what do? We throw it out every day. Our respect for the printed word is much, much less. And of course, we have less wisdom as a result. So this intense study gives a certain kind of stability to the mind, and then we proceed to meditation, growing accustomed to. So the meaning of that Tibetan word is helpful to us, growing accustomed to. So what we have confidence in, we meditate on it, we grow accustomed to it, we actually internalize it and eventually become it. And this is such a, it's such a finger pointing at the moon, you might say. I mean, through this kind of this internal internalization and this experience, because again, the concept itself is actually our true nature, seen in this very effervescent kind of way. And so if we go into that in an experiential, not a conceptual way, the peace is even greater. And it said when the mind is calmed down like a pond, all the waves have been stilled. And that can be just for an instant. You see the reflection of the moon fully, instead of its fragmented way that you do when you look at the surface of the pond and there are many, many waves and you're still seeing the moon, but it's just like sparkles of light all over there. You don't see the nature of the moon itself. It's round. It's peaceful. It's this color. It's a unity. Suddenly you experience that. And if you only experience it for an instant, it upsets the whole ballpark of samsara. Nagarjuna said that even hearing the word emptiness destroys samsara. So that's what we've been given here. And the greatness of the particular teachers that we have, the integrity of this tradition, all of that is extremely helpful because it allows people with questioning faith or less faith or different degrees of faith. It supports our legitimate faith. Like Lama Tarchin said, I'm not trying to build an army. It's not about building some structure for some worldly purpose or anything like that, but only because it works. When you look at the example of Tibet, this warlike people that conquered the capital of China. In their conquest, they were so threatening and scary that the Chinese emperor gave his daughter to the Tibetan emperor as a bride. She was the one that brought the first Buddha figure to Tibet. And they have, well, I think they built, it was unfortunately destroyed in the Cultural Revolution, but I think they built over it. They have an exact replica. They undoubtedly have some of the original pieces in there too, but this is just such a, it's such a symbol of our modern age. The destruction of the 20th century is just staggering. And yet even more staggering, ain't nobody learns nothing. We just keep charging forward. It's the state of samsara. It's very sad. So we're given these tools, which are so helpful to allowing you to have confidence, but it's a confidence that's rational. It's not a blind faith. It's based on this investigation. And of course, then once one has sort of a foothold, so to speak, one continues with this process because you can see the changes in your own life, good things coming out of this. I'm impatient as hell, but I'm only 99% as impatient as I used to be. And you see the benefit of that already. You see situations, even in a worldly way, we see situations where something happens at work or something, some dispute or something, other people together. And instead of just charging in, somehow it just works out that you wanted to charge in, but you didn't. And some other thing resolved itself. I think it was President Calvin Coolidge who said, if you got 100 problems coming at you down the road, if you don't do anything, 99 of them will go off the road before they get to you. There's great value in patience. And yet, we often make it worse by our attempts to fix. That is samsara. So the skillfulness that adopts when to act, when not to act, this, with the spaciousness of the mind, you have more tools, more opportunities, more knowledge, more wisdom of what to do. It's like Lama Tarchin was in Kathmandu and with some students, and they said, hey, we're gonna go out to this, Gretchen and I have been there, to this national park that Nepal has. From the national park, you can see Everest way, way off in the distance. And so he went out there with these people and they were all excited to show him Mount Everest. And I think they saw it, and Gretchen and I were there, it was cloudy, we didn't see a damn thing. And I had a migraine headache, which was really fun, driving over roads in Nepal, or what they call roads in Nepal. And anyway, but Lama Tarchin said that he got back to town and And the students suddenly realized it was very late. It was like, 11 o'clock at night or something. And they said, "Oh, Lama Tarchin, we're so sorry. We got back here so late. There's no time for you to do your Vajrayogini practice," because that's what they were doing at the time, I guess. And he said, "Oh, that's okay. That's okay. My mind is very vast. There's plenty of room to dance." So things become easier, and yet it comes out of the work of looking at our own mind and the confidence that comes, the reasoned confidence, the experienced confidence. And out of that comes this natural understanding of others and a natural compassion for others, completely unfabricated, completely spontaneous. One Chinese poem says the compassion of the Bodhisattva is like reaching for your pillow in the middle of the night. Things are a little bit off. You just reach for the pillow. You don't have some thought, "I'm going to reach for the pillow." You just do it. And you don't have any kind of pride about it. "Look how wonderful I am reaching for my pillow." You're not looking down at the pillow and just thinking, "That pillow is less than me, and other people don't have as great a pillow as I do, or I wish other people had had a better." There's no concepts. It's just a simple, natural thing, but it comes out of the mind that has been revealed, that has been abided in, and then natural. Okay, let's stop here for now, take our tea break, and come back and we'll do some practice. All right, first, any questions, anybody, before we, Rachel?
It's sort of a question.
Oh, right, we've got mics.
I don't know if it's a question or an observation that I want to share and maybe have a little feedback on, but when you were telling the story about the young Chinese boy who, in hearing this mantra, came to full realization.
Actually, the sutra. You heard the sutra being read.
Sutra. Yeah. For the first time, it dawned on me the idea of previous, of karma.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, this young boy was in this situation in life at this moment, but was it really possibly karma that brought him to, in that moment, be able to become fully realized? And I've just never made that connection
Mm-hmm.
before.
Mm-hmm.
And is that kind of a correct connection to make, or is that just sort of?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know, in the teachings of karma, I don't know, certainly his connection to the Diamond Sutra, I have to believe was karmic, previous lifetime, and was like right on the verge of realization. There's one modern Japanese master who was doing the traditional takahatsu. You go around and beg. The Japanese do it in a very kind of formalistic way, like the monks did in India a long time ago. But theirs is more ritualistic. They're ringing a little bell. They have a staff, and people, they only go to little villages and stuff where people are into it, so to speak. But begging for food in a ritualistic way. In India, it was real. But nonetheless. And so he was doing this. And of course, he had done a lot of meditation, all sorts of stuff. And as he was doing it, one of the older women in the house, went out the back door of the house and squatted down and urinated in the backyard. And, or she had before he came, I can't remember. But nonetheless, he was looking at the bubbles in the urine on the ground. And one of the bubbles popped. And that was the trigger for his realization. So with Hui Neng, I absolutely believe that he had come to a very high state, so to speak, before, because this is full enlightenment we're talking about with him. Whether or not, but what I don't know myself about karma, don't understand, is whether him actually, being at that spot at that moment, I think that it is karmic too. But there might be more randomness in that. I don't know that karma controls every single tiny thing that we're doing. But in the internal way, as far as cause and result, what are the results of our experiences? How do we respond? And certainly the thoughts in our mind have been generated by us before. So with hatred, we're going to get more hatred thoughts coming, and we're going to get more retaliatory thoughts coming, all of those kinds of things. Because we've stained the lens of our mind so that we see things like through a rosy or a gray or a violent lens. So yeah, and the other thing is that for me the biggest doubt was not so much the Buddha, but in the Buddha's teachings. Easy to believe that someone came to great enlightenment, right? But you don't know what great enlightenment means. So for me, I mean, rebirth was the biggest doubt. But when you start to realize that this is about the nature of the mind and how do we actually exist, and then when, especially with the Bardo teachings, you see how we like live in different spaces. I mean, our dream space is different from our waking space. Bardo just means gap, these little gaps we live in. And it was easy for him to believe that there's a death gap, that that's a different experience than right now. And certainly I could see already that there's a dream gap, which is different than right now. And then, although I'm not a great meditator by any, still, you can still see that there are meditative states that are different than our ordinary. So all of those different gaps. So then when they say there's a gap between dying and being rebirth, it's like a little easier to accept because you've already heard the teachings on gaps and you've studied them. Then you've experienced to what degree something. So again, it becomes easier to take a leap. And these lamas are just asking us to take a leap all the time, but it's a leap towards being ourselves. That's what's so paradoxical about it. So yeah, I'm glad you appreciated that story in Hui Neng because it's one of the great teachings in Zen Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism itself. And my snarky kind of way, snarky is the wrong word, but I just always get a perverse kind of confirmation when I hear about the little minor civil war breaking out, because those Chinese monks are faced with great enlightenment, and their response is, I'm losing my position. I'm not as important in the monastery now as I was when the old guy was here. And so all that human beings do against their own self-interest. Okay. All right.